Driving home on the highway from yet another 16-hour workday, Michelle got a migraine that was so awful, it felt like she was having a stroke. She took the off-ramp to the nearest hospital for treatment. As a mother of 2 children who had battled significant medical issues, Michelle's body decided it was time she prioritised her own health and forced her into a month-long rehabilitation with lasting effects on her overall mental and physical health. Michelle, the host of the Resilient Entrepreneur podcast, understands how the universe does throw adversity to us when we want it the least, but sometimes when we need it the most, for the changes we then implement to our lives for the better. Our conversation wiggled into some difficult moments, including the normalization of corporate America persona and the gulf between personal and professional needs. Michelle's ability to identify and act upon those realizations of who she was and who she wanted to be amidst the resulting depression and anxiety are clearly demonstrated during this interview. Michelle shares fantastic tips about how she continues to get through each and every day to be a mother, an entrepreneur, and to be Michelle Mercier. Have you ever had one of those gut-wrenching moments where life ground you to your knees and you found yourself asking in despair, why me? This podcast is all about sharing your stories and journeys, from asking why me to declaring this is why me. Discover how ordinary human beings like you and I have found their extraordinary levels of hope, courage, compassion, and provided a new perspective for greater potential and self-empowerment during their darkest defining moment. As a creative artist and coach myself, my guests and I discuss the interconnectedness of emotion and transformation in those moments, and how their actions then seize the opportunity for discovering their unfiltered and authentic voice, and ultimately their life's purpose. I invite you to join me each week as we share insights into how adversity can be turned into a unique advantage. Today's guest is Michelle Mercier of the Resilient Entrepreneur podcast and CreateHonesty.com. Michelle believes the universe does throw us big curveballs, and we can use these moments to work on and strengthen our resilience muscles, knowing we have the ability to survive and grow when we give ourselves the permission to do so. From Fortune 500 companies and nationally acclaimed nonprofits, Michelle made the move into the entrepreneurial space, and through multiple challenges affecting her 2 children and herself, and much more,
She now helps other women who wish to start their own successful business and overcome the challenges that will inevitably arise. I know you will love hearing what Michelle has to share with us today. Welcome to the WhyMe podcast, Michelle.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you.
I'm really excited to hear your story too. So, how about you explain to us one thing that you have on your bucket list and why it is there?
I have a lot. I have a long bucket list. One of my things that I've always had on there, though, is I'm a big fan of just over here in the States, the national parks that we have. Because, on my list is I'd like to visit every single one of them and anything that's similar in any other country. And I think, my affinity to be drawn to those is because I like to feel small, I think, in this universe, if that makes any sense whatsoever. But I mean, I've seen some pretty amazing things, from sunrises on mountaintops in Hawaii to, I've been very fortunate to see some other pretty amazing sights. And every time it happens, I love that feeling of, I'm one small drop in this just amazingly large universe. So that's something that's kind of on my list to do throughout my life, is to just expand on that and hit as many as I can.
I love that. It's like one thing that becomes so many things. And the thing I love most about what you just said then is feeling small. So often in our lives, we are told to think big and be big and everything. And I agree with that with some things. Mm-hmm. I also agree with having that different perspective that we are like a little pinprick in amongst everything. Yeah.
It just puts stuff into perspective. And it's almost like this grounding force for me. So when I've stood in those areas and I've seen things like we have Crater Lake is something over here, and it's just this massive body of water that's so blue, so blue, that I'd never seen before. And it just felt like, oh, okay, there's more to life than, some of the crap that we think is really important too. So it's just very introspective.
Yeah, I love it. And as a visual person myself, and I used to teach photography a lot, I would always tell people to look for that other perspective. And macro photography is looking at the minute. And so often I would be taking photos and people would be like, what are you looking at? Like, there's nothing there. And then I'd show them, they're like, whoa, how did you see that? How did you find that? And I'm always saying, it's perspective. It's about being open to see things from a different angle, and almost like that childlike perspective, when we put ourselves in our little children's eyes and get down to their level, we do see things differently.
You do. Absolutely. I was just speaking to a group earlier and I spoke to them about, I don't know if you ever heard the term bubblegum brain. But for kids here, they talk about it, and it's, having kind of the ability to have flexible thought and not be rigid in your thinking and like look at things from different perspectives. And it was interesting. So I had a room full of people looking at me like I was crazy. And then I was like, no, like we need to be able to have that flexibility, that ability, especially, in the entrepreneurial space or just in life in general, to look at things, like you're saying, from such a different perspective, or to kind of bend and mold our thoughts to be, something that maybe we're not thinking about every single day.
Absolutely. Bubblegum brain. I am coining that term. I love it.
I think it's a children's book that my son read or something, because I didn't just make that up. When I wake up in the morning is, how do I want to start my day? How do I want to show up in this world today for my kids, for my business? So that also, it's a conscious choice and not just kind of letting the world lead my emotions. Rather me kind of stepping into the driver's seat for that.
I absolutely love that. And it is so important to start the day the way that you want to finish it, with solid, purposeful intention.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, it's just, I think a lot of people forget that, is that, it doesn't matter what circumstance you're in. The thing that you can control is the way that you approach it. And with so much craziness going on right now in the world, in general, it's like you can choose to, wake up and embrace the day, or not. And I remember hearing on a podcast once, I can't remember who the speaker was, that said, every morning when she wakes up, the first like thought that she has is like, I'm back. She's like, when she wakes up, she's like, I'm back. Like,
Awesome.
I'm alive, I'm back for more. Like, so that always has stuck with me. Like, every day that you open your eyes, like, you're back. Like, that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely is a good thing. And for some of us, it is something we're very grateful to have, having nearly not been here. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Totally get that. That's awesome. Well, how about we hear a little bit more, I'm sure, about that and other aspects of how your story has developed. So let us know a bit about your background and how you came to be where you are today.
Yeah, so I've had a really interesting journey. So, I grew up in a household that, wasn't picture perfect by any means. There was a good amount of addiction in our household, sprinkled in with abuse and some really negative things. But there was also pretty amazing things in there too. So I learned from a very young age that there were ways that I did not want to show up in this world, and that there were ways that I did want to show up in this world. So that's kind of always guided my path in general. And then, I graduated from college with a theater and music degree, of all things. I went to school for thinking I was going to be a lawyer, and I came out with that. So let's say my parents were a little confused.
Okay.
But, I was always kind of a passionate person, but I also always had a very solid business mind. So I ended up getting a master's degree in managing nonprofits, specifically arts. And then I jumped into the tech world for a decade. And I ran high-level tech teams and, just learned amazing things through that. And then, life has a plan for you sometimes. And my team was outsourced. I was laid off, and I had a choice of, what do I do there? Do I go back into a job that, taught me a lot, and a role that taught me a lot, but was slowly sucking my soul out? To be blunt, I was working 24/7. I had at that point 2 small children with some pretty serious medical issues. So I just decided to take the leap. I like to refer to that as my floor moment when I got the call that I was laid off, because I had a choice. And it didn't mean it was the easy choice to make, because I cut our household salary in half pretty significantly by doing that. But I fought my way through the last 4 years building 2 successful companies while juggling 2 kids with medical issues and myself with medical issues and all sorts of things that I had not seen coming. And, I came out stronger for it. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Yeah. So I'd love to explore that on the floor moment. What did that feel like for you? What emotions were running through you? And did you have one of those moments where you're like, I don't know what to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's talk about that moment a little bit. It's all wrapped up in so many different emotions, but I feel like, I've had lots of different moments where, from holding my son seizing in my arms to watching my other son turn blue to, being suicidal with postpartum depression to, so many things. But for some reason, getting that call that my job was gone, that brought me to my knees, which I've always found really interesting because, I can go through all of these crazy things that you would have thought really floored me. But I think in that moment, I was also looking for some sort of normalcy because I was on maternity leave and I just wanted that piece of me back in that job and in that career. And, when that pulled out, I kind of gave it up to God. I think that phrase you hear a lot, but just give it up. And I had it. Like that was the last, I could deal with the other stuff, but this was my last sense of kind of normalcy that got ripped away. So in that moment, just crying hysterically. And I know that many people have had that moment. Sometimes it's on your bathroom floor, sometimes it's in a closet, whatever it might be. But in that moment, I found myself really saying, like, what the F? Like, I've done all the things. Like, how much more? How many more tests do you want to send my way? Because I do believe the universe, everything kind of was sent to you for a purpose, but really, like, and it was a combination of like anger, confusion, but at my core, I also knew I didn't like who I was in that environment,
Okay.
so a lot of people ask me sometimes, well, did you take time to marinate on it and then decide to jump into entrepreneurship? And if I really look back, I think I knew on that floor that I wasn't going back. Because again, I didn't like who I was. I didn't like, something about that corporate environment that I had been in really had me never doing anything without an agenda. There was a lot of fear-based decision-making happening, as there is a lot of the times in corporate America. And also, I think I've always been somewhat of an entrepreneurial spirit. And, the universe is interesting because if I had gone back into a serious job or a corporate job like that, I would have been fired because what was to come in the upcoming months with my little guys,
Right.
I would not have been able to stay in a solid job like that.
Just listening to your story then, I get a very strong feeling that perhaps in that hysterical crying mixed in with the fear and the fact that you're a little bit confused that you've had all these other defining moments in your life and yet this one was hitting you so hard. It also touches me that perhaps there was a bit of relief in there. You touched on that you weren't truly your authentic self in that corporate environment. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I think that is such a defining moment in our lives where we realize this is who I want to be and this is who I am at the moment and how do I get from one to the other?
Yeah, I mean, it's like someone turns the lights on. I think sometimes we know, like I knew my husband of all people said to me, because again, I came out of undergrad with a theater and music degree, like not anything. If you had told me I would have been leading like technical teams 10 years from now, I would have told you were out of your mind. But my husband was like, oh yeah, I never understood why you went that way. And I was like, well, that would have been good to know 10 years ago, honey. Like, I love you, but where were you? But I think a little like to your point, I think a part of me was kind of relieved by it, but also I spent the months following that moment undoing a lot of stuff. People would ask me, well, where's your business plan for your company? And where's this? And where's, where are all those official things? And I said, I'm not in it for that right now. That's not where I'm at. Could I sit and write a kick-ass marketing plan and a business strategy? Yes, I could. But I'm just really just trying to figure out who the heck Michelle is, like, which is why my company's name on paper is Create Honesty, because I never want to go that far away from kind of my center again. And I kept hearing it from a lot of other people too, that, a lot of folks had checked the boxes of, I've got the degree, check. I've got the job, check. Family, check. And, we were sold a bill of goods that was supposed to equal happiness, and it didn't. And especially for a lot of women in my circle, I kept hearing it over and over again. So, I mean, it just cemented to me that my company is called Create Honesty because of that. No matter what it's framed at, I don't want to change it ever if I can help it.
Yeah, I so love that. Honesty, not just to everybody else around you, but honesty to the core of yourself.
Right.
And who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and also like, it helps me when I'm choosing clients too, right? Because if I look at somebody and I say, oh, well, if I have to take on this client, that means I have to, miss this thing for my child, or I have to like compromise this. Then I say, no, you don't. You don't, because anybody that you're bringing in has to understand that these are your boundaries and this is the way that you've chosen to live your life. And if they're going to work with me, that is my life. There was a couple of years there where, any moment, I mean, with children in general, any minute, something could change. I mean, life in general, but especially for us, there was like no sense of consistency in that. So if you want to work with me, that was the case then. So it gives me a good perspective on who to bring into my circle too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people need to understand the importance of working out who you are. So understanding what your identity is so important when you're starting a business, because your business is a reflection of you. And if you're uncertain, if you're still trying to work out who you are, then it's very, very difficult to have your business succeed. And it may succeed in the interim. If you're looking, though, for the overall longevity of your business, your foundation needs to be rock solid, and you are your foundation initially when you start your business. Tell us a little bit about how long that process took and how you did have the strength and decided to go your own way despite what other people with good intentions were trying to tell you what to do instead.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, I think you hit the nail on the head, good intentions, right? Like, I can now at this point, and because I've heard so many questions, especially when I was first starting, imagine telling your parents, like, oh, hey, I have a 6-figure salary, but haha, just kidding. I'm going to go over here. I think I probably gave my mom a heart attack, So there are very many well-intentioned people who are watching you take this leap. And I got good at, after a while, figuring out which ones were asking me how things were going with which motives.
Right.
There were definitely people who were scared for me, asking from that perspective. There were definitely people asking from the curiosity perspective. And as you've probably seen, like, once one person leaves, it gives permission to others to leave. So I know in my circle, many other people that I know have now gotten the permission to do it, and it's been okay. But then there's the other group that unfortunately is asking and watching to see if you'll fail. And my husband and I are, one, a good team financially and just life in general, but two, I think we know that failing, number one, isn't a thing. Something may fail, but it doesn't mean like it wasn't worth it. Yes. So, and to me, at that stage in my life, and right now too, I would have rather failed trying and learned through that journey than kept doing the other option one moment more. And I think, when you ask, like, at what moment did, kind of know how you were and stuff like that. I think it was probably maybe a year or two after I started, because I did so much soul searching, and also, a mom of kids that I didn't know what the heck was going on. It's hard enough to raise children when you're a newer mom. But then, you throw 15 curveballs at you, and it's a different realm. But I think also, like, I knew what my core values were. Right. And I think that's the key, is that people think, you have to understand your authentic self and that will never change. Like, that's not the case. My business has changed and kind of taken different spins and different things. But at my core, integrity is still a thing for me. Maintaining my kindness for others. Like, there's certain things that I don't want to compromise. Yeah. Ever. And now that I feel like I'm getting older, I just turned 40 this year, like, it's almost like, take it or leave it. Like, I don't feel like I have to apologize anymore for myself. And that in itself was very freeing. And I'm not sure, I think maybe that was just in the last year, honestly, where I stopped feeling like I had to, like Brené Brown says, like, the performing and the pleasing and all that stuff. That's exhausting. I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah, it is so exhausting. And I mean, talking about exhausting, adversity in all its different forms is exhausting. And sometimes I believe that we need sometimes to get into that state to have these epiphanies, to have that different perspective, because we are so tired physically, we are so tired emotionally, we are so tired mentally. We're in that point where we're like reassessing. Hang on a minute, what is going on here? I've got all this uncertainty. What can I control and what actually really matters to me?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, and for me personally, my body, like, it just gets out. It'll just stop. So when I was working in corporate America, I mean, I was running a European team from the United States. So I was up working starting at 5:30 in the morning, sometimes earlier. And I was working until Asia Pacific came on at 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And, you know, one day I just got hit with a migraine, and that migraine, I was driving home on our highway, and luckily I was passing an off ramp with a hospital because I thought I was having a stroke.
Right.
So all of a sudden I end up, and it was a month-long migraine.
Wow.
You know, and it was my body's way of saying, like, we're done here. And I mean, that's a pattern that I know about myself. So I also know when I got both of my kids medically stable, that's when my stuff started hitting the fan.
Right.
Like all of that stress, all of that energy manifested in, you know, a couple diseases of my own.
Right.
So, you know, there's only so much that you can take from the exhaustion perspective.
Correct. And what you touched on there is something that so many mothers will relate to.
Yeah.
That we're so busy holding everybody else around us up. And particularly when there's difficult things going on, once that settles, it's like, and then our body goes, right, now that you've done all that important stuff, let's let you have some time off, and you have no choice about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, for me, like I've pretty decent anxiety, we'll say, you know, and a history of anxiety and depression and stuff like that. And my anxiety never hits when like stuff's difficult. It hits afterwards because everything keeps together. And then you'll find me in a ball in a panic attack, and everyone's like, well, why are you freaking out now? And I'm like, because that's the way it operates. It allows me to get through it, which is amazing. But then you still have like a reckoning with the emotions. Either way, it's coming no matter what.
Yeah. And so important to allow that to happen. And that itself is something that resilience teaches us, to know that it's okay to fall apart every once in a while, really. You know, you do need those moments of being on the floor, or you do need those moments of staying in bed all day sometimes. You do need that space emotionally to go, you know what, it's okay to do this sometimes when I need it. And it's so important to understand that connection to yourself so that you can recognize those patterns and you can recognize when this is happening. And the earlier that you can be aware of those signs, the earlier you can start putting in place management strategies so that you don't fall quite so hard.
Exactly. I mean, and that's the thing about building those muscles, right? Is that, you know, the more times you go through it, and it's horrible to have to go through, you know, ridiculous amounts of adversity. But to your point, you get up quicker every time.
Yeah.
You know, so like when the pandemic and stuff hit, was it hard? Is it scary? Is it all those things? Yes. But our household over here, we were kind of like, another thing. Let's go. You know, and I don't mean to downplay it, but we're just so, our muscles are so strong over here that, you know, we adjusted and fared a little bit better than some folks may have, you know, emotionally.
Yeah. And to me, that brings up another really important point, or experience, probably I should say, in that, again, let's go back to what you said at the start. You had all of these life-defining moments. There are all these different types of adversity. And the one that surprised you the most was one that you didn't place really as much value on. And the fact that adversity is not only going to come at you at different times in your life and in different forms and different levels of severity, if you like, it's also going to depend on where you are in that moment when it hits. So even the exact same adversity at different times in your life, you're going to respond to very, very differently. So I would like to know a little bit more about that moment, your on the floor moment. What was it at that time that made it hit you so hard?
Yeah. I mean, I think if I think back, it was because I've been hanging on, I think, by like a thread in general. I mean, 3 months out from having a baby, and I have a history of pretty severe postpartum, and, all the medical issues that he had, and worrying about that, and worrying about my oldest who still had his stuff. We had just gotten to that point where things were, quote unquote, stable. And, looking back, they weren't really that stable. They were stable enough, like they felt stable. It felt like our old normal, like stuff could finally normalize and I could exhale a little bit. And then vent. And I think also a lot of my self-worth was tied up in my career at that point.
Right.
So, as a mom of two, like I didn't know what that definition of me looked like yet, especially like a mom of two with the stuff that I'd been handed. I didn't know what that version of Michelle looked like, but I damn well knew what the ass-kicking corporate version of Michelle looked like, and that got taken away. So it was almost, the disruption of being so close to that quote unquote normalization of things, and having it being removed, I think, is what really kind of hit home on that. But, in hindsight, normal wasn't going to exist again. Ours was disrupted way before that. As even kind of a medically normal, quote unquote, normal kid would be like, we just had 2 children. That is a completely different game. That's a game changer. So it was also the universe's way of saying to me, like, wake up. Like, you're already in the change. You may think you can hold on to the old you, but no, we're done here.
Wow. It's like the screen was lifted, because what you just described there, that was your pillar of strength, was entangled in that corporate you. And once that was taken away, it stripped you bare.
Yeah, it did. And I think at that point also, I vowed not to let my accomplishments define me as much, So, I mean, it was a pretty big feat for me to come from where I came from, and then all of a sudden be leading like PayPal Europe's like email operations and all of these things that on paper people are like, wow, but there's a freaking hot mess behind the scenes, like anxiety attacks and panic attacks and sick kids and suicidal thoughts and all of this stuff that as high performers, you don't have that. You're not allowed to have that. But I did, and I can acknowledge fully out that I've almost removed myself from this planet a couple times, so I was so just like in this picture of a person that when you take that away, what the hell was left?
And if I may ask, what is it like being in that state when you're like, I just don't know if I can do this anymore? As in, I don't know if I can do life. Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing about depression sometimes is that you don't realize you're there until you're there. I think, people who will say, well, it drives me insane when people simplify it down to like, we'll just snap out of it. If we could all snap out of it, we would have freaking snapped out of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, in those moments when, you are thinking of that, or you do not think you need to be here, number one, some of it's not rational, period. And some of it's chemical. But I think for me also, I have a family member who tried to take himself off the planet quite a few times, and I was directly impacted from that. So in the back of my head, I think that's a safety mechanism for me,
right? To
say, you see what that has done. It has done that to you. You cannot do that to your children and your husband who loves you. So, I mean, that to me was kind of that light. But again, like, it's still one of those things that's in the back of my head always of like, what if I hadn't had those thoughts? If I hadn't had that anchor? But again, the universe put me through the stuff before so that when I got to that moment of my own, I would have ding, 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 like, remember the collateral damage on the other side of that? Don't do it.
Yeah. And just to help our listeners, because a lot of people have either gone through those thoughts themselves, or known somebody who has had those thoughts or has unfortunately gone through with taking their life.
Yeah.
When you're in that state, you use the words that there is irrational thinking.
Mhm.
And so therefore you're not thinking logically. What is it that prompts you to seek help? Now, I say seek help as in you could seek help from somebody else that you know can help you through that or
Mhm.
would want to help you through that, but also seeking help from yourself. Because when you're in that state, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of people are not able to actually reach out and tell anyone what's happening. And so therefore you're relying almost solely on your own safety mechanisms, as you put it, to try and get through that moment. How does that work for you?
It's Vera-Lee from Australia, the founder of the WhyMe Movement and podcast. Well, one idea, one vision, one person. This self-funded podcast and movement has started to take a life of its own, which is exactly where I had planned it would be. To hear the stories of the far-reaching impact across many countries in this world, it humbles me to know that my vision is shared, understood, and positively influencing people to look at the changes they can make for their own adversity and how they can find the strength, the courage to be inspired and feel connected and empowered to use their adversity to their advantage. One of the best ways that you can help support the WhyMe movement and podcast is to subscribe to the various channels, such as the podcast platform you are listening to this on now and the YouTube channel, which has much bonus content released. By subscribing, you will make sure that you are one of the first to find out who is coming up next, more about our guests, and the interesting questions that I ask them, which do not get released on the podcast platforms, and lots of other good bonus content. I always love reading your comments, and so please feel free to leave them on each of the platforms. The beauty of social media is that you can easily share single episodes or any of that bonus content from YouTube onto your own social media platform with your friends, which helps to bring this positive, inspiring message to far more people, allowing you to be an active participant in the WhyMe movement and vision. On Apple Podcasts, it always makes a big difference if you can leave a rating, review, and subscribe to the show. Let's get back to today's story.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I've been too close to the edge where it scares the hell out of me now. So I'm proactive on what I see and what I do and the things that I put in place to avoid getting that close to the edge again. And whether that's educating myself, surrounding myself with a team that can see it, and by team, I mean, I have multiple coaches, a therapist, acupuncturist, like a whole bunch of people who can see the warning signs.
Fantastic.
And I think the thing is too, is my husband, God love him, but he's with me so much that sometimes those people who are closest to you don't see it because it's gradual.
Yes.
It's a gradual decline. And they may mistake it for moodiness. They may mistake it for who knows what, so I think, I don't want to speak for him because I'm not him, but I can say that, there was some guilt from him. I remember him expressing because he didn't see it, but I was a postpartum, suicidal case, potential suicidal case. So we were in a fog in general,
right?
But that's how things get missed. So if anyone is listening and you've kind of gotten to that edge and then you managed to pull yourself back, number one, amazing. Kudos to you, because that is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But I think, everything from putting a phone tree in place, I've been told that, if you were thinking it, if it even comes into your head, there's a list of people. If that one doesn't answer, you call the next one. Then you call the next one.
Fantastic idea. Yes. Yes.
So.
And do you have that written down? Like your
Yeah.
phone tree list? Yeah, that is so good.
Yeah. And I mean, luckily I haven't had to use it, which is wonderful. But, I also feel like there is this little piece of you when you get to that close to the edge that is always scared of getting back there. And knowing that, to your point, like when you are there, there is a level of irrational thought. And you're like, well, what if I wasn't? Like you said, like, what if I wasn't? What if I didn't have that light bulb moment? And then that scares the hell out of you, or should. It scared the hell out of me. So I don't want to go there again.
Yeah, I know that. I understand those feelings too. I was there quite early on in my career due to a number of things that had occurred, and the way that I processed those at that time. And I'd already gone through a bit of adversity in my life, and a little bit the same way as you. When it affected my career, I realised at that point so much of my self-worth I had wrapped up in my job and what I was people-pleasing, providing, servicing within that. And so that was a very impactful moment to myself as well. And for me, my journey of finding my real, honest, authentic, transparent self didn't come until after I recovered from domestic violence and sexual assault within my marriage. That journey is so different for everyone. And it's interesting to me coming out the other side of it, when I look back at different moments, I realised just how far I have grown in my concept of self-worth, in my concept of who I am despite my environment and despite anything else externally that's happening. It's such an important place to be. And I'm going to bring you back to where you said about turning 40. I think for around 40, that, 38 to sort of 42, it is such a magical time for a woman, particularly who does have children in their lives. Something changes in us around that time. And yes, quite often there seems to be a health crisis that happens during that time as well. And I often wonder if, again, that's us holding on to so many things. And we get to the point where we go, enough. This is enough. Something needs to change.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, you get to that point where you're like, no, I've weathered enough shit. I don't have to take this from you anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and I've had some people in my life who I think, number one, I'm also very good at this point in my life, as I'm sure you are, seeing the patterns.
Yeah.
Right. And knowing my triggers. And, I tell clients all the time when they're in kind of these dances and like, you each play a role in that relationship to step off the dance floor, and that when the minute I realized I didn't have to prove myself anymore, especially to certain people, was the minute I stepped off that dance floor. Yeah. And to be honest, it's not, like I said, I think sometimes people think it's going to be a big, like, fuck you moment. It's not even that. It's that it's not it doesn't take up my headspace anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas prior to that kind of light switch flipping, and whether it was 40 or, like you said, that like late 30s time where you just have those, like, this is not the life I want to live moments, you just let those things fade away. It doesn't even have to be like this rage against it. It just, for me, I just don't want it to take up my headspace. I don't want people who are going to trigger me. And I don't put myself in situations, if I can avoid it, that will lead to me feeling like crap about myself. Like, not that everything's going to be roses and sunshine, but if I know a certain person and their tone or their inability to, have a two-way conversation is going to trigger me, one, I know that's not me, because I know me at the core. And two, I don't want to be put in that situation. So I choose not to. Whereas before I would just make myself to be polite. And I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah. That word polite, I've spoken about it on a few of my interviews. It's an interesting word. And personally, I've redefined it to including so much more transparency and honesty, and that I need to truthfully say what I need to say in an honest and calm and caring way. And if the person at the other end is offended by that, that's their choice to be offended.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it had to have been like mid to late 30s when I realized like, if what I'm doing is not meant to hurt you, and I know that, and again, like, you know yourself, and somebody could argue like, well, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, Michelle. Like, I understand that argument, but I also know myself, and my intention is never to intentionally harm somebody,
Yes.
or to hurt their feelings, or to do anything like that.
Yes.
So, and I also say to clients all the time, that's not your shit to own. Like, if I'm not being a jerk, like, and you think I am, number one, if you don't tell me, then I definitely don't own that, because I'm not a mind reader. And number two, like, if you do tell me, at least give me a moment to say, oh, okay, I can see your perspective, but that's not how I meant that.
Yes.
Because I also know for myself, I think very quickly. And a lot of the times, and it's interesting because I see it in my children, my sons now, and I'm like, oh, cool. Okay. And my tone can be kind of like, because I'm 50 steps ahead of people sometimes. Yeah. And I'm not doing it to make you feel dumb. I'm doing it because I'm 50 steps ahead, and like, I'm trying to like, figure it all out, but over the years, I've learned to stop apologizing for that too, because it's about the intention behind it. And I'm never intending to hurt anybody. That's never I've never really done that. It's not my thing.
Right. Yeah, it's so important. And giving yourself the permission to do that, to be communicating and be able to then receive back that information to clarify what that communication was intended as, and having the intention that you're not wanting to harm anybody is so important. I'm almost laughing only because almost every single day for the last 2 weeks, my son and I have had some sort of communication, and I lost my voice all last week, which meant our communication had reverted back to my nonverbal communication. But whether it's verbal or nonverbal, almost every single day we have clashed over something, and I have ended up laughing. Here he is getting quite... Now, I've got to be careful here because his emotions I often misread. So again, here's a classic example. He comes off a little bit curt, a little bit this, a little bit that. He also, like me and yourself, are 50 steps ahead. So it's like, get the information out quick, let's move on to the next one. And so often I'm like, I thought you meant this. And he'll be like, I meant this. And I'm like laughing, going, everything with us comes back to words and communication, every single thing, every time.
Yeah.
And now he's at the point where as soon as he sees me start to smirk or laugh, he's like, yeah, I know, communication. So that's something that we're constantly working on.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I feel like we're all working on, because I think at the core, it all comes down to like, can you see me, right? Like, I want to be seen, and I want to be understood. I want to be heard, whatever that may be. Yeah. But you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to communicate both ways to understand and appreciate the other person too. Yeah, absolutely do. And my tagline when I started my business many years ago was, everyone has a story if you're willing to listen. And I've come back to that. I've come back to it now because it is so important for what I do, for the podcast, for the WhyMe Movement. And yet here I am struggling with communication with my own child, which I think is hilarious. But it's that difference between hearing and understanding. And so I'm learning to take out any assumptions, because assumptions are so dangerous in my world. Really are. I'm learning to take out those assumptions of any tone that I think I'm hearing, and just get to the point of the message itself, the actual information, and then checking in. Did I understand this correctly? And that process has made a huge difference to our relationship. We have both been in isolation, self-isolation, because I am still in the highest risk category. So we've been here for 7.5, nearly going on 8 months now. My child hasn't been able to go to school in his final year of high school. And so it's technically a very intense period for us.
And yet we have grown so much closer.
Yeah.
The fact that even just being in physical proximity so much more of the time and working on these different types of communication, it's a beautiful thing. And COVID has been extremely difficult for so many people. Personally, for my son and myself, we've had more connection with each other through this time. And so for us, there's been some benefit to that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the thing is COVID awful? Yes, there's obviously awful things, but I think, who was it? Like Ivan Eisner, who's like the guy who started BNI or whatever, called it, I think it was him, they called it like the Great Pause. You know, all of this is kind of called the Great Pause. And there's something to be said when you are, you know, the stereotypical thing is if you're together 24/7, you're going to hate each other. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but to your point, it also gives you a moment or moments, like 7 months or 8 months of them, to really work through it as long as you're open to doing that.
Correct.
But, you know, that's a crapshoot with depending on the emotions that you're locked in with, right? Or the way that people are processing different things. But, you know, my husband and I learned a long time ago, we're by no means perfect at it. And we still argue about it sometimes, but the two of us process emotions very differently, very differently, you know, but we have to allow and respect the way that the other one does it, or, you know, it's not going to happen. We're going to implode.
Yeah. It's giving each other, so the other person, but also yourself, permission to say what you need to say and remove the judgment side, remove the assumption, try and remove the emotional reaction and get to the core of what it is you're trying to communicate. That is so important. And I'd like to relate that back to depression. Having suffered it, I was diagnosed with clinical depression back when I was talking about having those suicidal thoughts as well. When you're in that moment, we often don't give ourselves permission to just be. So for you, depression has a spectrum like everything else. Postpartum depression, how is that different? Because a lot of people have gone through it and then there's a lot of people that haven't. How do you explain that? Because so many people say, you've just had a baby, it should be the happiest time of your life. How did that, how did that all come about with you? Like, you know, what's it like?
Goodness.
What was going on?
Oh, you should be happy, but also sleep deprived and scared out of your mind and so many other things, right? I think, number one, that's a lot of society's fake crap being put on women when really we're just trying to figure it out. We don't come out of the womb, you know, one, all wanting children, two, all knowing how to raise them. Like, it's a human. Like, it just amazes me that people think we automatically know. But I think for myself in particular, you know, I was predisposed to it. I have a family history of it. You know, I had a pretty decent mental breakdown in college. You know, so I was pretty primed for it, we'll say. You know, I'd suffered from anxiety, pretty major anxiety attacks for years prior to that. You know, and then also I think this idea in my head that I could, at that point, that I could still have it all, you know, coupled with that, you know, be the perfect mom, do all the things, right? Like, don't, just kind of all came crashing down on me. And part of it's also chemical when it comes to postpartum too, right? Like, you're sleep deprived. Yeah, hormonal, all of the things. And also, I completely forgot about this. I think it took them 10 months or 14 months, somewhere in there, to figure out I had sleep apnea too. Okay. So even when I was sleeping, you know, sleep when the baby sleeps, whatever I did there, I wasn't. Yeah. So my brain was gone, I think, by the time I really kind of got to the edge of that. And I'm sure there's some people out there like, it wasn't as bad. It didn't seem as bad as it was. I'm like, but you weren't in my head. Yeah. And the amazing thing for me has always been that I don't realize how much is in my head until my meds are upped or something else happens. So one key thing too is I had parathyroid surgery, which is different than your regular thyroid. Parathyroid controls your calcium in your body. And I had it removed, and my anxiety was horrible, like crazy paranoid thoughts, like all the time. Always racing, always ruminating, thinking people were against me, all this crazy stuff. And I woke up from surgery, and I remember looking at my mom and being like, oh, it's awfully quiet in here.
Wow.
I didn't even realize, and I mean, that's happened to me on a couple different occasions when my meds have been adjusted too, where I've been like, oh, I didn't realize how loud it was in here, how crazy the party was until it was silenced, So because it becomes normalized. And I think for new moms, especially, the expectations are already too high.
Yeah,
They're already
they so
too
are.
high in us. And then you put the chemical stuff on top of it. Just the pressure to take care of another human at all. And then, by the way, lose the weight. By the way, get to the mama groups. By the way, go back to work. Like all of the things. It's too much.
Yeah, so true. I've got a little scene that keeps coming back to me as you were talking about that with motherhood. I went through a very difficult labour. Both my son and I nearly died through that labour. I had an emergency C-section. I woke up 3 days later. So I hadn't even seen my child for 3 days. And they bring in this child, this baby, wheel him in when I woke up. And I'm like, is that actually my baby? Because I'd missed that whole connection part of it. Yeah. And I don't know that I've actually ever really shared this with anyone before, but I had that moment, and then she handed him to me, and the second I was holding him and looked at him, I said, this is my baby. I could see it, but it was just that disconnection. And then so I'm breastfeeding him for the first time. I've just had this major surgery. I can barely move, and I've literally, I'm like half an hour waking up after a 3-day being somewhere else. And I'm holding this baby and I start breastfeeding, and then he does this massive poo that went all up the back. It went all down his leg. It started going all over me, and it just kept going. And I'm like, what do I do? I'm sure that breast milk and feces don't mix, and how am I supposed to clean this up? Like, I can barely move. And I was like, this is not right. Punani. He was very good at them, and he got better. But yes, I was like, wow, what an initiation into motherhood. Like, come on. And so here I am. I call in the maternity nurse. Now, this particular nurse had been through me from 16 weeks pregnant. I had gallstones and I was very, very ill, and they were too worried to take them out during the pregnancy. So I went through probably half my pregnancy in hospital. So I was in and out all the time. And then she was actually the nurse that came in during labour, which had been going on far too long. And she walked in, and because she knew me, she could tell straight away I'd actually gone into shock, and no one else had known and realised and understood. And she walked in, and I remember that moment, and she said, why isn't the surgeon here? Get him in now, And I was like, oh, thank God, because I was just completely almost out of it by that point. And I was like, my body is giving up. I can feel it. And thankfully to her. So she comes in, and I'm thinking, oh, thank God, this is the woman that, could tell everything was wrong before, and she comes in, she goes, get over it, Vera, you need to learn how to do it at home, deal with it yourself, and walk down. And I was like, what? What? Oh, my goodness.
It blows your mind. You're like, no, but where's the book?
Yeah. That's right. And it always happens when no one else is there.
Like, I mean, it's crazy. Like, I remember that moment after you have a C-section when they're like, nope, you got to walk. And I was like, you want me to do what now?
Yes.
And it's like less than 24 hours after you just sliced my body open.
Yes.
And similar to what you were saying, like my C-section was like, they numbed me up and out through my arms so I couldn't feel myself breathe.
Yeah.
And I remember months after that crying in my car because I couldn't remember my second son being born. I had to do it by looking at pictures from my husband. And I think people really underestimate that trauma.
Yeah.
Around, giving birth.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that a lot of my medical issues that came up because I left my husband when my son was about 4 or 5 months old, um, and went straight into domestic violence and sexual assault recovery and all that sort of stuff. And through that process, through those couple of years, I was like, wow, I started to see so much and so much growth. But I also started to understand the link between trauma and illness. And
Yeah.
it is so
Yeah,
strong
absolutely.
and apparent and obvious. And
Yeah.
because we do hold on to so much again, we've got to keep it up. We're the mother now, and then I was a single mum and going through all this stuff. And it's like, wow, I've got to keep it together for everybody else. And somehow for me, although I was dealing with a lot of stuff, I never gave myself total space to really be with what had happened until much, much later. So it was interesting that process, how it works and how much trauma really does affect you until you get to that point, and how you need to give yourself permission to have time to go through that process, and that it's okay. It's okay to still get upset about things. It doesn't mean that you're not recovering. It's all part of the journey.
Yeah. I mean, I always remind myself that you're entitled to your emotions.
Yes.
Period. And to your point, they are tied together. That's why you have people that have heart attacks at young ages that have been through trauma. That's why, I'm sorry, panic attacks are physical. At least for me, they're a head to toe physical reaction. There's so much of a big tie between the two, and it just amazes me how sometimes in the medical profession they compartmentalize them or bucket them out instead of dealing with them together. I think right now they're just starting to talk about GI issues are mental issues, right. But I mean, there's so many studies about even Holocaust survivors and how multiple generations, the generations out, they're seeing GI issues and stress reactions and everything from that. So in PTSD and reactions and so many things that, your body has to get impacted by it. Your mind's running the show. And if your mind's impacted, your body's going to be.
Absolutely. And there brings in something else in that I remember Dean Graziosi maybe 2 months ago just said something that I heard, which was, you only compare yourself to who you were yesterday. And that is such an important thing to do. It's not about comparing your journey with someone else's. It's about how far have I come from yesterday? How far have I come from last year? How far have I come since that happened? And within that, it's about understanding the power of your conscious thought and working on that subconscious and unconscious as well. So it's the holistic approach, because once you have that ability to cleanse all of that trauma, you can eventually get to a point where you can still feel the emotion and relate to it. And I personally never want to lose that aspect. And yet it doesn't dictate my life today. So it becomes an experience that I had that has helped make me who I am today through all that learning. And yet I can still feel connected to it enough to know that, yes, that did happen to me. It's not like, oh, that's just something that I no longer have a connection to. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it doesn't define you. I think that's a conversation my husband and I had, early on when the kids were when it was just such a mess everywhere. And both of us made a conscious decision. And I remember us talking about it. And we were like, we can't let this define us, because I've seen it, and you've probably seen it too, where people just get so engulfed in the trauma that becomes who they are.
Correct.
And it is who you are, but it shouldn't define or dictate the way that you move forward in life. It's always going to be a piece of you, but it's not the piece of you. It's not the whole.
Yes. Yes. And though I do believe that in those moments we do come to a point where that is what defines us within that moment. And so it's that process of working through that and coming out the other side that is so important, because otherwise we stay in that moment and it does keep defining our life.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Look, I have thoroughly enjoyed talking with you today, and
It's amazing.
I
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on. And I have one last question for you.
Yeah, sure.
I already know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway. Would you be the person you are today without the adversity?
No, no way. And people have asked me that, and like, would you trade it in? And like I said, I hinted to earlier, is that I've been through some pretty traumatic things even before, the crazy stuff with my kids and everything else. And there was a period in time I would have answered this question differently, but to your point is, once I moved through it, and once I can really see how it's built the pieces of me and built me to the person I am now, I probably wouldn't change any of it.
Beautiful place to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And the
You're
other
welcome.
thing, those resilience muscles, we know they're going to get more of a workout coming up.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it too, is like not thinking they're going to always be like rainbows and butterflies and like happiness, because that's not, for every winter there's a spring, but for every, fall there's a winter. It's going to always, it's good and bad are two sides of the coin. They exist together.
Yeah, they do. And it's about finding the beauty within the mess. And I mean, that is something that I do with my artwork. I created my most impactful pieces when I was in the darkest places of my life. And so being able to understand the importance of darkness so that it allows us to see the light, and we appreciate that light so much. And understanding those resilience muscles will help us even more. The more that we practice using them, the more that we can turn what we might feel is ugly into something more beautiful, something that's useful for us.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the healing process too, is I have never wanted to give the trauma kind of the satisfaction of not turning it into something beautiful in my life. There has to be a reason for me. And I think that's had to be one of the main things that's kept me going through some pretty crappy times. It's like, there's a lesson here. Keep going. You will learn it. You will see it. It'll appear soon. Like, it will come. Like, I always know that, this too shall end, or too shall pass. Like, that's a true statement. And from that comes the learning. And that's kind of what's always kept me moving through it too.
Yeah. It's so important to see that opportunity within the situations, some opportunity to learn, some opportunity to grow. Sometimes it's even an opportunity to share that can bring us there.
Yeah, agreed. Like the hero's journey, in a way, like you're called to the quest, and then, you come full circle, and then, sharing it out makes somebody feel less alone. Like, if somebody's listening to this right now, they could be thinking they were the only person having some of these thoughts and going through some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people are just waiting for one person to speak first, because they think they're weird, or they think, oh, I must be the only one having these thoughts, or I must be the only one who, is dealing with trauma, or whatever it may be. But when one person opens their mouth and says, speaks about their trauma, it gives others permission to do so as well. So, I mean, that's definitely part of the reason why I do what I do too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the show. And I'd like to give you the opportunity to let people know how they can get in contact with you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can find me at createhonesty.com, and then Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all at Create Honesty. And then, my podcast is The Resilient Entrepreneur with Michelle Mercier, and you can find that on all the places podcasts are found. So iTunes, Spotify, anywhere really. But just Google me and you'll find me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here, Michelle.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
That was awesome. I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's refreshing to be able to speak openly with somebody about it, because I think sometimes people don't allow you the space, and kind of, you're a very good interviewer where you are actively listening and engaging, but in a way that's not, that allows people to speak. So thank you for that. Thank you for holding space for that. That was nice.
You're welcome. And thank you for giving me permission to do that. It's something that I couldn't interview any other way. Well, another story, more WhyMe moments, and more reasons to feel inspired to change your adversity into your advantage. An integral part of the vision of the WhyMe movement is the ICE acronym, I's for inspire. When you feel inspired, you are more likely to take action. C is for two things, actually. Connection. You are not alone in this world. There are always people here who want to help you get through your adversity and feel positive about your life and your purpose. It is also for courage. Courage, in my opinion, is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And there lies the importance of connection. For sometimes we don't feel we have the courage to do things on our own. And yet once we have the emotional support of those people who we trust, it can help us to feel that fear and do it anyway. And lastly, the E is for empower. When we have that connection and the courage and the inspiration to know, get our clarity of purpose, well, that is when we feel empowered to take the action that we want to do to change some aspect of our lives for the better. If you would like my personal support in this area to help you get through adversity in your life, you can contact me at Vera-Lee Original on social media.